Oh, we're about 1 minute in, Peter. So I think I'm going to get things rolling here. Start off by saying welcome. Welcome to everyone that's joining us today for our live show with Dr. Peter Andersen. My name is Todd Millar, and I'll be your host for today's event. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I know you're all busy, and we appreciate you joining us live. And of course, for those that are dialing in after the fact and hearing the recording, that's great as well. As TEC Canada's president and CEO, I've had the privilege of working with many of you and leaders like you for almost 12 years now. And it's truly been an inspiring and transformational experience for me personally. Today's event, it's an exclusive one. It's available only to members. And it's great to see such an awesome turnout for both members and chairs. So let's get to it. We're here to discuss a topic that's relevant to all of us, the economic landscape and the important related topics that impact your business. And within that discussion, TEC Canada's CEO Confidence Index for the second quarter of 2024, which is a quarterly survey measuring the confidence of Canadian business leaders of small to medium-sized enterprise. The survey was conducted from March 1st to April 1st, 2024. And we're very pleased to share that once again, we had 433 participants, making it one of the largest and most timely economic reports. We've included the most recent CEO Confidence Index and the latest Andersen report in the chat area, and you're welcome to download the reports and share them with your teams. If you have questions, we'd ask you to please place them in the Q&A section. And if we don't get to your question during the time that we've allotted today with Dr. Andersen, we'll make sure that Dr. Andersen gets the questions forwarded to him, and offline we'll get him to answer it and reply back appropriately. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the man who reviews the data, provides insights, and helps us index that information with the past CEO Confidence reports. He also delivers our Andersen Economic Report every month, which is available to members online at teccanada.com or through the TEC Canada app. Both the Andersen Report and the CEO Confidence Index are great resources for our tech community. So, Dr. Peter Andersen is an independent consulting economist specializing in economic forecasting. He obtained his doctorate in economics from Harvard University. Early in his career, he was the assistant chief of the Bank of Canada's research department, where he advised the governor and the Bank of Canada on economic conditions and the economic outlook. Dr. Andersen also spent several years with several major Bay Street investment dealer firms before founding Andersen Economic Research, Inc. He acts as a filter, separating the signals from the noise in order to provide clients with the useful information that they really need. So without further ado, I am very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Peter Andersen. Welcome, Peter. It's great to be with you today.
Todd, it's great to be here. And I want to thank everyone in your organization for this fantastic survey. It really is one of a kind, Todd, to have over 400 responses. And you know, it's like you're going, let's say you go to a conference and you go to a conference with 400 attendees and you get a chance to talk to every one of them and ask them, 15 or 20 questions. Basically, that's what our survey does. It really gives the real deal in terms of feedback on how our members feel and what they're thinking about the challenges and opportunities that are out there. And the bottom line, Todd, is that things are looking better. There is some good news out there, and it does look like business conditions are improving. It does look like we are going to see Bank of Canada rate cuts. Interest rates are very important for small and medium-sized businesses. And it looks like we are perhaps, keep our fingers crossed, looking at sometime this summer or this fall for the Bank of Canada to start cutting rates. So basically, that's kind of my summary as we get going, as we get started on this.
Hey, that's fantastic news, Dr. Andersen, and starts off with a positive. So yeah, let's get at it. Maybe show some slides and get going on our show.
Sure, let's do that. Let's do that. Golden, do you want to put up that first slide? Thank you very much. here we go. Now, I pay attention to what the Bank of Canada puts down in on paper and also what they say. And everyone, this is a key indicator for Bank of Canada decision making. Just take a moment and look at this chart. Look at the title, okay? We're looking at consumer prices. Sounds simple enough, but we're digging underneath the surface and we're trying to look at a subset that doesn't have as much noise. We're looking at excluding food and excluding energy. Okay, so we're getting down to the core, and this is what we're calling it. It's the core group of consumer prices.
Mhm.
More than that, take a look at the third line in the title. We are looking at change in prices, but we're looking at over the last 3 months. And this line shows you the running history of 3-month changes in this core measure of consumer inflation. Okay. So we've got a tracking here of the 3-month change, the latest 3-month change, the 3-month change a month earlier, and then a month before that, and a month before that. And what we've done, Todd, we have put this at annualized rates. Okay, so the latest 3-month change, if this were to continue over 12 months, this is what the annual inflation rate would be. Okay, now a chart tells 1,000 words. That's why I like charts so much. We can obviously see that there's a downward trend in this line. But what we can also see, Todd, is that most recently, there has really been a big downward shift in this line. Going over to the axis in terms of numbers, 2% is a key number because this is the Bank of Canada's target. So the 3-month change in the last 2 months has been running below 2%.
Mhm.
And that's very encouraging because it means that we are headed in the second half of this year. This is kind of an underlying momentum indicator. In the second half of this year, we are headed into a space where inflation will be running low enough, measured on a 12-month year-over-year basis, that the Bank of Canada will start to feel comfortable about cutting interest rates. So that's the message. And we know that the Bank of Canada really puts emphasis on this 3-month rate of change. And you can see the way it's tracking now. We are tracking below the 2% line over the last 2 data points here on that 3-month change.
And of course, you've always shared, Dr. Andersen, that that direct correlation between inflationary rates and, of course, the interest rate. So, with the assumption that this stays hovering around the 2.5, 3% range, we no doubt will see some.
Well, exactly, Todd. And 2.5% is the magic line in the sand.
Okay.
That's the red line. And if we can get the 12-month change in the total all items consumer index running below 2.5%, then we're getting close to the target. And the Bank of Canada will say, okay, we're running at, let's say, 2.4 in the second half of this year. We can start cutting rates. And that's so important because inflation is the number one thing we need to follow. Inflation is going to determine tomorrow's interest rates. And tomorrow's interest rates are going to determine how our members do in their business later this year and going into next year. So
And
it's
and
by
Doc,
yeah,
just
go
to
ahead.
sorry to interrupt, but just to be clear, when we talk about that core or total interest rate or inflation rate rather that you were referring to, that excludes food and energy.
It excludes food and energy, and we do that, Todd, because we think that this is the best way to look at the true underlying trend.
Okay.
The true underlying trend. And by using 3-month changes, it means that we filter out the inevitable bounciness that you get just looking at the change from 1 month to the next.
See.
Now, the next slide, I want to show you the next slide because this kind of continues with the same theme, Todd. This next slide shows you an even more sophisticated measure of core inflation. We're not just eliminating food and energy. We are looking at this median consumer price index as representing the central tendency in price movements on what's in the basket. Okay. And this is something that the Bank of Canada has put together. They create this other measure of core inflation. And what I've done here, I've tried to keep it simple. The concept of the median measure, another measure of looking at central tendency or core, it's a bit tricky to get into the actual description of how they calculate it. But it's basically the central tendency in terms of the median part of price movements. And you can see what I've done here is I haven't shown the 3-month change. I'm just showing the change from 1 month to the next.
Okay.
And you can see the last 3 months, those bars are so much lower and so much smaller than what has come before. And, if you look at November and December, those were scary months. We were getting some pretty big price increases here in that basket, in the central tendency of price movements in the basket. But look at what we've got in terms of January, February, and March. A real breakthrough on the downside. So good news. Now, the next slide shows you the Bank of Canada's decision dates. These are important dates because this is when the Bank of Canada decides what it's going to do with rates. And the last time they had a meeting was on April the 10th, and as you know, there was no change. Now, the next one is coming up on June the 5th. I actually think that is still a little bit too early because for sure, they're not going to be changing rates in the United States. And the Americans have a June 12th date for their interest rate announcement. We come a week earlier. These are Wednesdays. We come on Wednesday, the 5th of June. The Americans come on the 12th of June. The Americans are not going to change on the 12th of June. I'll guarantee you that. So it's unlikely that the Bank of Canada wants to get out ahead of the Americans by being the first off the mark to cut rates. But as we get into July and September, July the 24th and September the 4th, those are, I think, dates where we have a good chance of seeing the first rate cut. So the announcement that we would have would be that, yes, we have one rate cut. And I'll tell you, Todd, when we see one rate cut, we know there's going to be more than one. Not every meeting, but every second meeting is what I would say. So we could see a rate cut on July the 24th and then again on October the 23rd. They're going to be a bit cautious, but once we see the first rate cut, Todd, I think we're going to see two. So that's going to be a good news message. It's going to be a confidence builder for businesses in small and medium-sized business community.
And I wonder, Peter, when you mentioned, kind of that connection, if you will, between Canada and the U.S. and perhaps Canada not getting ahead of the States relative to a U.S. decision, would you see that continuing in July?
Todd, thank you very much for raising that point because the situation in the United States is a lot different.
Okay.
It looks to me as if there's even a possibility in the United States there might be no interest rate cuts at all this year.
Oh, interesting.
Uh, that is out there as a possibility. It's not the main case probability, but the situation in the United States is they're not getting anything like the cooling down in inflation that we see in Canada.
Okay.
In fact, the last 3 months running in the United States, they have been looking at increases in inflation that are still way above what they need to see. In terms of the American Consumer Price Index, if you look at their measure of excluding food and excluding energy, they have been looking for the last 3 months. That's January, February, and March. January, February, and March indexes values. Monthly increases of just under 0.5% each month.
Oh,
So if you are increasing at just under 0.5% each month, that comes out to an annualized rate of about approximately 5%. So their underlying tendency, their trend in the United States hasn't been showing anything like this big change that we've seen in Canada. So
interesting.
the Americans are not going to be cutting rates um, in June. They actually have a meeting coming up on May the 1st.
Okay.
Okay. No cut in the United States on May the 1st. No cut in the United States for their June meeting, which is a week later than ours. It's on the 12th. And then I doubt that they'll even cut rates in July, at the end of July. So when you get into September in the United States, Todd, there's an election coming up. Once you're into September, you're really in the heat of election season in the United States. And the American Central Bank doesn't want to become part of election season. They don't want to get involved in politics. So it very well could be that they will duck uh, their September meeting as well. So it could be that the Americans, yeah, maybe they do cut rates, but maybe they wait until after the November 5th election, or they wait until the end of the year. So we might just see one or two cuts in the United States. It looks to me like there might only be one. So if that happens, Todd, the Canadian dollar, I think, has to react. If we're cutting rates and the Americans aren't, to me, it means downside for the Canadian dollar.
Okay. Well, that's an important element for our members to think about for sure, as that sequence plays out, Peter.
Well, it's good news and bad news, Todd, because it means that we have a better advantage internationally in terms of selling our products to the United States, and that's important. So it gives us a more of a competitive edge with our export business.
Yeah.
However, when it comes to purchasing items from the United States, they'll become more expensive. So that's the bad news part of a weaker Canadian dollar. And of course, it means as far as tourism is concerned, it's going to be more expensive for Canadians to travel in the United States. So I guess in a way, as far as holidays are concerned, more people would perhaps, decide to take their holidays in Canada instead of going to the U.S.
So back on, of course, your calendar of events, you're anticipating that perhaps later in the year, as we say, the summer, maybe even that September, that we perhaps are going to see some lowering or interest rates coming down a little bit.
Well, it's interesting, Ty, because our survey is giving an interesting feedback here. Most of our members, about 3/4 of our respondents in the latest survey, they do expect rate cuts to come in Canada either this summer or this fall.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and that supports what you've been sharing with us, right? So,
Yeah, that's right. It's about 72% of our responses expect rate cuts in Canada either this summer or this fall.
yeah.
And so, because of that, we have a certain amount of optimism in our survey responses. We're getting, kind of a positive feedback with respect to um, expectations for company sales volumes, for members' investment plans, for the outlook for profitability, and also the outlook for hiring. So I would say, Todd, that our survey is showing that confidence is not weakening anymore, but it's actually improving somewhat. So our survey results are saying that confidence is on kind of the right track right now. My final slide looks at the job market, Todd, and it's interesting because it really does show quite a difference going province by province on the 12-month change in total employment. And Alberta looking good, Nova Scotia looking good as well. You can see that British Columbia isn't that far behind. Uh, I would say that BC is not looking too bad at all. Newfoundland and Prince Edward Island, of course, are smaller provinces.
Yeah.
But take a look at Quebec and Ontario. You can see that the job change in the last 12 months, Quebec and Ontario have really fallen quite a bit behind what's been going on in Alberta and also BC.
Yeah,
So
it's
that gives
interesting.
you kind of a look at what the numbers on the economy are saying and how that reflects in our survey.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Yeah, certainly lots of, as you say, some optimism coming out of this quarter's index in the survey. What I mean, other than what we've been talking about, Peter, what most significant changes in the economic assessment since last quarter? What would you put your finger on?
Well, I guess let me talk a bit more with respect to, I guess, the overall um, summary and the overall situation.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, what I would say is that uh, we still have inflation pressures. Uh, Amongst our members, we still have a feeling that there is pricing power. Um, 65%, basically two-thirds of our members feel that they can pass on cost pressures. They do indicate it's getting a bit harder to pass those on, but still, we're getting two-thirds of our members saying that they feel that they can pass on cost pressures. So I think that's kind of an interesting story because pricing power is, I guess it's a confidence builder. And the thinking is that our members, in terms of how our members see inflation, our members are not quite as optimistic as the Bank of Canada. Bank of Canada is saying inflation is coming down to under 2.5%. Our members in the survey, the majority are saying inflation will be in the 3% range.
Mhm.
So there's this feeling, yeah, we can pass along our cost pressures. Inflation will be in the 3% range. And in terms of what those cost pressures are, Todd, compensation is a big one. This would be wages, this would be salaries, and this would be benefit payments as well. So
Yeah.
our members are saying that compensation in the 4 to 5% range. So in order to bring inflation down, if we think we can pass along compensation costs running at 4% plus, how do we get into the 2% range for total inflation? We need to have productivity improvement.
Yep.
Now, our survey goes into that. And our survey does say that, a pretty solid majority of our members are making productivity improvements.
Hmm.
However, about a third are saying they're not, they don't expect any change in their productivity in the next 12 months. So that's both a good news and a bad news thing, isn't it? We have almost 60% of our members saying, yeah, we're improving productivity, but we have, about a third of our members saying, no, we're not able to improve productivity. So there's a little bit of a mismatch here, isn't there?
Sure is.
How do we, the Bank of Canada thinks inflation's coming down, but our members are saying we've got 4%, 5% compensation pressure. And a third of our members are saying, we're not going to be doing anything really with productivity.
And what's driving
So
that?
that gets us into why.
Yeah.
What are the reasons for these headwinds? And our members are really giving us great feedback here. They're saying there's 4 reasons that are holding back productivity improvement.
Okay.
One of them is talent. The other one is expense. The third one is government. And the fourth one is market size. Now, our survey was finished on the 1st of April, as you know, as you said. And our federal budget was on the 16th of April. So I think I would throw in another reason, capital gains, because the new capital gains burden is going to be implemented on June 24th. And our members have got time to devise strategies between now and the 24th of June. But I would say that the capital gains changes, I think they are counterproductive when it comes to productivity.
Hmm.
So,
and I guess
I would add,
given that you would
yeah.
have anticipated if that would have been if our survey would have closed after that, perhaps that would have shown up in a significant way. Maybe there'd be a fifth reason why productivity is lacking.
Well, that's right, because I think that capital gains are a reflection of risk taking.
Hmm.
And if you are taxing savings and taxing capital gains on those savings, I think it's a discouragement for risk taking. And I think that risk taking is essential when it comes to going out and doing things differently and getting into new technology and taking a chance and taking a risk that something might work.
Yeah. So I guess having said that, and given that we're not advisors on this show, but that would be probably good advice for any one of our members to consult their respective advisors as it relates to capital gains and their business.
Yes, most definitely. And from what I understand, I think that's happening in a very big way. The tax advisors are extremely busy right now. So, yes. I guess there's another thing I'd mention too, Todd, because Canada has not performed well as a country with productivity improvements for the last 7 or 8 years. Our national numbers on the amount of output per worker hour, they've basically not increased since 2016. And why is that? Well, it's interesting. One of the 4 items mentioned as a headwind by our members is government policies and government support. And this was before the capital gains announcement. But in the United States, it's different. And it's really interesting because the amount of business investment in the manufacturing sector in the United States, it is huge. There's just a tidal wave of plant construction in the United States in manufacturing. And these are high tech plants, a lot of them related to semiconductor production. And it's kind of this taking back of the supply chain from offshore to onshore in the United States. And there was this legislation passed in 2022 in the United States. It was the CHIPS, CHIPS, the CHIPS and Science Act of August 2022. They gave $280 billion of new funding to science and to chip manufacturing in the United States. And so when I look at the numbers for investment spending in the manufacturing sector in the United States, it has just exploded in the last 2 years. So, I worry about this because I don't see this kind of support in Canada, and I worry that we have ahead of us. We already have, looking back 6 or 7 years, kind of a challenged history on improving output per person hour. I'm afraid this is perhaps we're stuck with this, and it's going to be a challenge going ahead.
Yeah.
The bottom line would be the offset would be a lower Canadian dollar. That's one way to stay competitive. If we can't do it through productivity, we can maybe have to do it through a lower Canadian dollar.
Yeah. So I know we're kind of talking around obviously we're drifting into the American side of the equation, what I guess the government is doing to support business in the States. When you think about appreciating that our index closed before the budget announcement, but is there anything that you would draw to our members' attention that might be opportunities inside of the recent budget announcement that you might say CEOs watch out for one way or the other?
Well, I would imagine that we are looking at housing construction because the government has recognized this tremendous need for housing in Canada. And the Bank of Canada did produce this report on its last interest rate decision date, their monetary policy report. And the Bank of Canada is showing that the demographic need for housing in Canada is running far, far above the supply of housing. And the demographic need for housing is really based on the number of new household formations per year. Households have to live somewhere. And so the government has tried to respond to this in its budget with various measures.
Interesting. Just switching gears a little bit on you, Peter, but when you think about GDP, outlook for Canada, what do you see?
Well, that is really something that has changed. You asked me to comment on some of the things that have changed.
Yeah.
And this report that the Bank of Canada released on April 10th, the last interest rate decision date, that's their monetary policy report. Inside that report, it's got, I think, 36 pages, but there's one table that shows the Bank of Canada's forecast. And they are predicting that in Q1 of this year, that Canada's economy grew at an annual rate, price adjusted volume terms, of over 2%, something like a 2.5% annualized growth rate in the first quarter of this year. Now, they put this in print, Todd, and they wouldn't have done this unless they were pretty sure that they were fairly close to being right. We won't see the official number until the end of May, when Statistics Canada produces the actual estimated number, but a 2.5% annualized growth rate in Canada in the first quarter of this year, that's really good news. And I think it does tie in to some of the things that our members are saying with respect to their sales revenue, their business investment plans, and their outlook for profitability.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting.
So it's good to get some good news from the economists for a change, isn't it?
Well, I don't know, Peter. I think often you give us glimmers of hope, anyways. When we think about, I mean, I know we're referencing, I guess, the cost, and we've talked about this. I think about the last several quarters that we've had conversation. We talk about the confidence that our members have in the ability to, I guess, offset their costs and increase their prices to their customers. And it seems like that's changing. Risks involved, either particular industries that have greater pricing power than others. Can we elaborate a little bit more on sensitivities around this topic?
Well, I think it's important, Todd, because the survey results that we just got showed a surprisingly high percentage of responses to pricing power. The 65% number, 65% of our members said they thought they had the ability to pass on costs to their customers. And that was up from under 50% in our last survey. So that was something to pay attention to. However, within that 65%, we asked kind of an additional question to kind of fine tune the answer. We had quite a few people saying that, yes, they can pass on prices, but it's not as easy as it used to be.
See.
So the uh, the number of responses saying within that 65% saying they have pricing power, the ones that say it's harder to pass on, we can do it, but it's harder now, they outnumber the rest by 3 to 1. So there's definitely this increase in kind of resistance, which the Bank of Canada would like to see, of course, because it means that inflation is going to come down as they hope it will come down.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's always been out there, and it's always been a bit of a mismatch in terms of, hey, if we have 4 to 5% compensation inflation, uh, yeah, and we think we have pricing power, how are we ever going to get inflation down so we can get lower interest rates? And that's where the productivity answer comes in as one of the big question marks. We need productivity in order to do that.
Yeah. No, I know we talked about that. I guess I'm going to go back to that, Peter, since you brought it back up again. When I think about, I mean, I appreciate the main reasons that are holding back that we talked around. I mean, is there anything specific that we would share with our members that says, look, if productivity is on your mind as a business owner in Canada, as it rightfully should be, what are the things that our members ought to be thinking about as it relates to improving their productivity in their business?
Well, I guess the question with productivity is that so much of this productivity is new stuff, Todd. We're talking about technology, and we're talking about the need for people that really do have the skills and that can give companies the kind of advice that they need. So we're talking about artificial intelligence. Well, what does artificial intelligence really mean? It's come from more or less the designers' workbenches into corporate boardrooms. And there's a decision process here in terms of, well, what does artificial intelligence mean for us? It's not a matter of just buying better machines, machines that work faster and longer. It's a completely new space. So it's very hard, I think, for any CEO to get one's grips on the dimensions of this new technology opportunity. What does it mean? Do we really have to reconfigure our business? And hey, business has been lackluster. It's been a hard road over the last 12 months, and some businesses are still feeling real pressure. It's one thing to say the economy is growing faster, but it doesn't apply to everybody in the room. I have some of my manufacturing clients, ones that are focused, let's say, even on exports to the United States, saying that, man, we really have had a drop in our order bookings over the last 3 months. And so, in that situation, Todd, it's a hard call to say you're going to go out and take a big commitment, a big risk in terms of spending a big bundle of money on new technology that you're really not that familiar with.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of it sure would be good to have the government really giving more support to the business sector with respect to productivity efforts. The government, of course, feels that its first responsibility is to people, and the social safety net is important, and housing is important. But the bottom line is that people need to have competitive jobs that are going to be able to compete with what's happening in other countries.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Yeah, no, that's well said, and of course, directly ties into the four elements, four main reasons that come out in our survey as well as it relates to talent and the discussion about AI. Dr. Andersen, I got to go back to interest rates. I know you're going to love that journey back to interest rates. But when we think about even a small change in interest rate, uh, what kind of an impact do you think that's going to have on small business?
I think it's going to have a big impact because, like I said, Todd, when we see the first one, we can be pretty safe in assuming it's not just a one-off situation, that we'll be looking at rate cuts, a series of rate cuts. And in terms of what would a normal level of interest rates be, uh, I think that a normal level of interest rates for let's say, the short-term policy rate in Canada, it would be in the perhaps low 3% range. Right now, the policy interest rate is 5%, but in a normal economy, an economy that is balanced with respect to inflation and with respect to unemployment, we would be looking at what you'd call a neutral nominal interest rate level of around 3%, maybe 3 to 3.25% on short-term interest rates. And right now we're looking at 5% on short-term rates. However, one of the things is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And when it comes to interest rates, there are many different kinds of interest rates. And mortgage rates are very important for Canadians. And the Bank of Canada does not set mortgage rates. Mortgage rates really come from the bond market. And the bond market is basically putting kind of a time value of money. It's a market mechanism that determines what bond yields, bond interest rates will be. And to a large extent, Todd, Canadian bond interest rates feed off what happens in the United States.
Okay.
And if we don't get lower interest rates in the United States, it means that mortgage rates in Canada have a limited space in which they can come down, because the way to forecast Canadian mortgage rates is to figure out what's going to happen to American bond interest rates.
Right.
And right now, they're not showing any tendency to come down.
Well, there you go. The 800-pound gorilla. I understand. When we so you said something that just registered with me distinctly as it relates to, we talked early on about inflation rates, so that magic number 2.5. Now you've kind of introduced that 3% on interest rates, and the other tie-in was unemployment rate. those are the three kind of connecting numbers that we should be thinking about. What would unemployment rate number be that put it in our minds?
Well, one of the things, Todd, is that our unemployment rate has been affected by our huge inflow of immigration.
Hmm.
We are getting so many permanent and non-permanent um, immigrants coming into the country that it is really expanding greatly the size of the workforce. And so what that has done is I think it's elevated the measured unemployment rate. So I feel that that's giving, in a way, kind of a miscommunication and a misunderstanding of how strong Canada's job market is. Um, so that it only makes sense, doesn't it? If we have been looking at unprecedented inflows of people into the country, that it would push up the unemployment rate as a result. And I think it has. So I think it's giving kind of a bit of a misreading to the job situation in Canada. Um, so I think the Canadian economy is actually doing better than the unemployment numbers, the unemployment rate would suggest.
Directly impacted by that immigration that you're identifying. I understand. Um, I know we don't like drifting into politics. I'm not going to take you there, but as it relates to the carbon tax decisions that have been made, when you think I mean, that's obviously impacting prices inside of small and medium-sized business for all of us. As we think about that, any thoughts on how we navigate through shifts in pricing as it relates to those businesses that are being impacted, arguably all businesses being impacted directly by the carbon tax decisions?
It's interesting because it's such a big issue in Canada. We don't hear about this in the United States. So on a relative basis, you see that it's more of an issue for Canadian businesses than it is for their American competition. And again, you get into political values and political valuation judgments here with respect to climate change and what you can do about it and so forth. So it's one of these questions that is circular because yes, of course, there's arguments on both sides. We all know that climate change is an issue. What we can do about it is a question mark, and how much we should be doing about it. Short term, the economy; longer term, what climate change does to the economy. So it's a very judgmental, a high controversial judgmental balance that has to be put onto these things.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Um, Peter, I know that often we get into conversations, and obviously there's all kinds of continuing sadness going on around the world. Obviously the Russia-Ukraine situation continues, the Middle East conflict. When you think about, I think, the correlation in here is we often drift into, although obviously the sadness with wars literally taking place, but supply chain and implications as it relates back to us here in Canada. We haven't really talked much about that. I'd be interested to hear your perspectives on that. Maybe
Well,
as
it's interesting because what we're hearing from our members is that supply chain issues have really diminished as an issue.
yeah,
In terms of supply chain shortages, it really doesn't seem to be a problem for our members, and that's a good news piece of information. I was really surprised. The majority is very big. We have 73% of our members saying that supply chain shortages are really not a problem, and that's to do with non-labor supply chain issues. That's to do with hard goods, non-labor supply issues. With respect to workers, only 16% of our members are saying that workers are harder to find now. So we have, you know, again, a response in our survey. Workers are not as hard to find today as they have been previously. I guess that was partly into your question about the unemployment rate, because we do have, more of a supply in terms of workforce size, and I guess that we have also received information at the national level beyond our survey. The job vacancies, are not really an issue anymore. We have basically got our unfilled job vacancies are back down to where they were pre-pandemic. And that's not the situation in the United States, but is the situation. So in terms of supply chain, things are looking better.
Yeah, well, that's
It's
positive.
a brighter situation.
Yeah, no, that's a positive conversation that we've missed a few times, haven't we, over the last several quarters, where it has been an issue that our members have been talking about. We mentioned the housing shortage. I know it's obviously across Canada. We're talking about it, all the time in Canada. When we think about, I guess, implications inside of the construction business, or perhaps even opportunities, lumber prices. Maybe we talk a little bit more about housing shortages and how it impacts all the small and medium-sized businesses that are in our midst today.
Well, the situation, Todd, it's really a work in process for housing markets in Canada. It's really dismal. It's really been dismal through the months of last year and into early this year for new home builders. The market has been, I don't want to use any politically incorrect phrases here, but what I'm hearing from the people in the know in new housing in Canada is that it's been pretty bad. And the best that they can say is that there's signs of some slight improvement taking place. My feeling, Todd, is that as soon as we get this first rate cut, it's going to bring the new housing market back to life in Canada. There's a severe shortage of housing. As I mentioned to you, the demographic need for housing based on households, the number of new households, says that we should have much, much more in terms of housing supply. And I think that one of the issues has been it's tough to be a builder. In parts of the United States, it takes maybe 18 months to get your project approved. Yeah. In parts of Canada, Todd, it can take 10 years to get your residential building project approved by government authorities. 18 months versus 10 years. So it's tricky because the government comes in many shapes and forms. The municipal governments have a huge impact in terms of development issues, development charges, the infrastructure that has to go along with new housing projects, who pays for them, and what the approval is in 10 years versus 18 months. I heard that from a person who knows just last week.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's interesting, of course, and drifting a little bit into maybe the bureaucracy around those two numbers, but we'll leave that for others to talk about.
But anyway, the first interest rate cuts, I think, are going to open the door and begin to turn the lights on again. The vacancy rate in Canada is under 2% for rental space. We are running under 2% for the rental vacancy rate on rental space, and that's an all-time low. We've never seen it this tight.
Yeah. Well, that's going to continue to have some challenges for sure. I'm noticing that we're coming to the bottom of the hour, Dr. Andersen. So of course, that's going to bring us to a close. Again, I would just like to thank everyone that joined us today, and also thank those that joined us after the fact. Dr. Andersen, as you know, we record this and then it's shared with the greater audience, and we get lots of attention after the fact as well. But again, my thank you to all the members and chairs for attending today and for taking part in participating in this survey. We started this show when you heard Dr. Andersen talk about applauding us and the amount of information that we're able to collect inside of our community. Such a huge benefit to all of our community and all of us, quite frankly, as it relates to understanding what's going on inside of Canada as it relates to our CEO Confidence Index. We have we've continued to reach that threshold of 25% of our membership participating. So your opinion truly matters, and so going forward, please continue to participate. It means so much to all of us here at TEC Canada and to Canada at large. We're almost 2,000 members at TEC Canada. That's pretty remarkable. So again, another interesting stat since we're on stats today, and just another major milestone for TEC as we continue to grow our business from coast to coast. This has been an unbelievable session, Dr. Andersen. Again, as I think about it, optimism. Maybe sunny days ahead as we think about the summer months coming, and maybe some interest rate drops and that magic 2.5 inflation number, as that's been anchored in my mind, and we'll continue to watch for that, and we'll stay away from the 800-pound gorilla. Thank you very much, Dr. Andersen, for participating so fully. I always appreciate my time with you, and the work that you do with us helps our TEC community tremendously, and helps us navigate and understand the economic climate. So again, thanks, Peter. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and we'll look forward to talking to you again real soon. Bye for now.
Thank you very much, Todd. And thanks for everybody on the line. Bye for now.